in this exercise we'll look at leveling resources when resources are over allocated. To do this we'll use our first exercise, which is Bob the Brickie. So let's go ahead and do that. You could pull up a save one, but no reason why we can't just build it again. A couple of little things to get started. Get rid of the timeline, make sure you're auto scheduled, and our project summary task, which we'll call exercise 3, leveling. So we had two tasks: lay 10,000 bricks and lay another 10,000 bricks. A bit lazy there. Each of those were 10 days. And we couldn't start the second until the first finished, for whatever reason. We'll come back to that in a little while. We then wanted to allocate resources to the job and assign them to tasks. So we'll start with Bob, then we have bricks, our first consignment, and bricks, our second consignment. Bob's work, but the other two material, which we could do all at once, but let's just go with it now. $50 an hour for Bob, and $1 a brick gives us $10,000 per consignment. We'll leave the rest as is. Last thing to do is allocate those activities to the resources to the activities. So assign resources. This one we want Bob and bricks 1. And in the next job we want Bob and bricks 2. Okay, and that should give us the 20 days duration, as well as a $28,000 cost. Right. Getting to home view, sort of middle of the tennis court. So that was our project. Now it seems weird, laying 10,000 bricks. Why does this one have to go before this one? What was it? Were we laying the bricks on top of the last row of bricks? Do we need to walk across water, with bricks laid ready for us to walk across? Normally that's reserved for putting the walls on after you finish the floor, or putting the ceiling on after the walls. That's something that cannot be done before that's finished. It's nothing to do with the resource, Bob. Okay, so your first instinct was, well, we can't get Bob working too hard, so we'll let him finish this consignment and then this consignment. That's not a predecessor link. That's a job for leveling a project. So let's get rid of that predecessor link. And you can see Bob could start on job 1 or job 2, but the problem is that if we've got him working at full capacity on doing job 1, he can't do anything on job 2. And that's where we get our little red men from, saying that there's a resource over allocation. So let's have a look in the resource usage tab or chart. You can see here Bob's doing 8 hours of work on his first job, and then before he knocks off he's got another 8 hours of work on the second job. It's possible that we could have shifts that long, but the calendar, or the way it's set up now, is Bob works 8 hours a day, so he's got an over allocation. So we need a way of sorting that out. So let's go back to our Gantt chart view, and we'll look at leveling this resource. So it's a resource, it's in the resource tab, and you see here you've got some leveling options. Don't go clicking this one yet, and we'll show you why. It's because there are a number of defaults set up by Microsoft Project. They might be slightly different in 2013, but I'll take you through these options and tell you why we would have one on it and not the other. So I think that's the default you'll see when you open up the your tab. I've used this before, so maybe that was the case why those were off. So the default is set up like here. So what's wrong with the first one? Leveling can adjust individual assignments on a task, which basically means that any resource can be allocated to any task. So if we had an architect on this project and a bricklayer, and there was a bit of overflow in the architect, then Bob could simply come on and design the building because he had some slack in his time. So we can't really adjust the individual assignments on a task, or reduce Bob's work to 80% somewhere or something. So take that one off, you don't want that. As a general rule, a task is discrete. It has a beginning and end, like a project, I suppose. Splitting up a task is a scheduling tool that you don't really want to use, because then Bob does a little bit of bricklaying 1, then does a little bit of bricklaying 2, then goes back and does a little of bricklaying 1. That actually has cost impacts and time impacts in terms of moving on to and off a job, and particularly if we look at knowledge work, learning or getting back on task is a big problem as well, so we certainly don't want that. Level manual selected tasks, well, you won't have any manually scheduled tasks because we are always using automated tasks. What you do want though, however, is as a first pass you want to see if there is any available slack, so we can allocate the schedule to fit around the resources within the available slack, so we don't have to delay the duration of the project. So put that one on. You can press OK and that just sets up the defaults, or you can actually operate this leveling and press level all. If you press OK, you press level all up here, but you can just do it here. It comes back with an error message saying, unfortunately, there's not enough slack in the system. In fact, there's no slack in the system. Both of these tasks here are on the critical path. Neither of them have any slack if we want to finish by this end date. So there's not much we can do about that. So if I get that message, then we simply go back to our options and we have another crack at it. In this case, we'll take into account we'll remove that constraint that it has to be available slack. What it does is simply, a bit like the predecessor link there before, it simply moves the second task after the first, allowing Bob to work 8 hours a day on the first task for the first 10 days, and then 8 hours a day on the second task for the next 10 days. That leads us to an interesting thing. Why the bottom one and not the top one? Does it matter? Well, probably not. Just take that leveling off. Alright. But it tells us a little bit about the tasks. In the class I mentioned, or your lecturer mentioned, that tasks or work packages were like cards that you deal out in a deck. And those work packages had information about what tasks would be undertaken, who was going to do them, how much they would cost, what materials would be required, and special instructions, what risks are involved. So each one of these tasks has one of these cards. So we'll just double click here, and there it is there. So it's the general information about the task. I'll allow you to look through that, and we'll certainly cover a few more of those as we go along, what's under each tab. I suppose one that you are aware of is the resources, and you can see for task 2 we've got Bob and bricks to assign. We can add notes, Bob, don't lay bricks before 8 AM because we don't want to wake up the neighbours, or whatever it is. So you can have notes there, notes about what the risks are, and create custom fields. Here we've got a priority. It's set at 500. It actually can go all the way to 1000 and down to 1. Right. It's an ordinal property, meaning that 501 is more important than 500. 600 is more important than 500, but it's no more important than 501 was compared to 500. So it's not the difference between the two numbers, it's the one that has a higher number, it has a higher priority, that's all. Alright, so what we might do is just increase the priority of this task to make it 600 then, to 600, which is higher than the default for all other tasks of 500. What impact does that have? Well, that means that the priority of this task and when it's scheduled is more important than this task. So if I now level you can see it fixes task 2 but moves task 1. There might be situations where that comes into place, where you can use priorities to identify tasks with key resources that you do not want to move. So if you're looking to level out resources, you certainly want to move around that task. You don't want to, that's your last resort.